Hello everyone, Fred here. In this installment of TPP Dynamite, I'm going to be reviewing the third and final part of Cobra Kai Season 6. And just as a little upfront warning, there will be moderate spoilers. These episodes have been out for about 2 weeks now, and I think it's fair to assume that most interested people have already watched them. So if you haven't, be warned. First things first though, if you haven't already, let me encourage you to subscribe to my channel. I post film, book, and TV series reviews. I do opinion pieces on entertainment, news, and affairs. I'm also an author of adult and young adult mystery novels. I recently released a new short mystery called The Intruder. There's a link to it in my video description below, and I encourage you to check it out as well. With that in mind, and without further ado, I'm going to just jump right into it. So I'm not going to bury the lead here. Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 3 was without a doubt the second weakest entry of the trilogy. It was better than Part 1, which really isn't saying much because Part 1 was the worst Cobra Kai anything and was basically just a soap opera with some poorly choreographed fights. Part 3 was worse than Part 2 though, and was not, in my book, a solid finale to either the Cobra Kai series or its characters. And I don't think that was necessarily the fault of Season 6 itself, so much as the fault of the overall show. There are some shows that get canceled a few seasons too early, then there are shows that get canceled a few seasons too late. And Cobra Kai is a show of that second kind. Cobra Kai really should have been written with a 5-season arc of maybe 13 episodes per season and 45 minutes per episode. The first 2 seasons were practical perfection, but seasons 3 through 6 just wasted so much time on soapy drama, petty, repetitious rivalries, and equally repetitious, fallacious debates about what it means to be a sensei, or who deserves to be a sensei, or whether someone should give up being a sensei, or which style between defense and offense is better. The material that seasons 3 through 6 covered really could have been condensed into 3 full and spectacular seasons, and the show likely would have been much better off for it. But I digress. This is not a Cobra Kai series review. It's a Season 6 Part 3 review, so I'll just stick with that. Season 6 Part 3 is essentially focused on 5 fights. Robbie versus Axel, Tori versus Zara, Miguel versus Axel, Johnny versus Sensei Wolf, and Kreese versus Silver. And in my book, that's already a recipe for disappointment because 4 out of those 5 fights, Robbie and Axel, Tori and Zara, Miguel and Axel, and Johnny and Wolf, involve rivalries about which the viewer does not care. I get that the Iron Dragons were introduced so that they could be seemingly overwhelming final antagonists for this show's 6 main characters, Johnny, Miguel, Robbie, Sam, Tori, and Daniel, in the same way that Mike Barnes was built up to be Daniel's ultimate enemy in The Karate Kid Part 3, but just like the Mike Barnes butt pull failed in The Karate Kid Part 3, the Iron Dragon's butt pull fails here because there's no meaningful sense of tension established between the main protagonists and those seemingly overwhelming antagonists, and because the main antagonists are not built up or fleshed out in any real way. Axel gets a sort of sympathetic bit of development as a character who's being abused and bullied by Sensei Wolf, who's been training Axel since Axel was practically a baby and who wants Axel to be a karate machine who does anything to win. But that entire storyline just plays as a reductive variant of the story between Kreese and Johnny from the original Karate Kid movie and even the first few seasons of Cobra Kai. Axel has no real rivalrous relationship with Robbie besides being a seemingly overwhelming opponent whom Robbie must regain confidence to face again. Axel's rivalry with Miguel is entirely empty because Miguel is so clearly right and because Axel is so clearly wrong. Axel's entire storyline of having a crush on Sam LaRusso, misinterpreting one moment of kindness from her, getting disappointed on learning that she has a boyfriend, and basically instigating a rivalry with Miguel over it, was just so reductive of the better executed Robbie-Miguel feud from the first couple of Cobra Kai seasons, and so empty because anyone who watched it knew that Axel was so unequivocally in the wrong there. The only part of Axel's story that had actual depth was the way by which his cheating and breaking Robbie's leg to win during their match served to give Miguel personal reasons for wanting to finish the fight and take Axel apart. And even that just made me roll my eyes because of how it was yet another example of Cobra Kai's writers cucking Robbie to allow Miguel to shine. Zara was an even worse written character than Axel because she has no development besides hating on Tori for no reason, pursuing Tori's boyfriend, SAing him, bragging about it, then wanting to beat on Tori just because Tori is not happy about it. Sensei Wolf, meanwhile, seems to just hate Johnny just because Johnny is a smart-talking American who likes beer and junk food. Just, you see what I mean. Rivalries only work effectively, they only resonate when each side has a legitimate grievance with the other. That's why Tori versus Sam worked for as long as it did. That's why Robbie versus Miguel worked for as long as it did. And that's why Johnny versus Daniel worked for as long as it did. Because there were two legitimate, though not necessarily equal sides to each of those rivalrous relationships. And the same just cannot be said for 4 of the 5 fights that are the predominant spotlights of these final episodes. The only rivalry that really resonated during these final episodes was Kreese versus Silver, and even that only hit at half strength to me just because neither Kreese nor Silver is exactly a sympathetic character worth rooting for, even though Kreese does make something of a heartwarming turnaround after accepting his own responsibility for Kwan's death at the end of Season 6 Part 2. And because it was so obviously telegraphed beforehand that Kreese and Silver were going to die one way or another. The writers all but announced Kreese's impending death with the overly sappy way that he basically made amends with everyone he wronged before facing Silver a final time. And the writers all but announced Silver's impending death with the fact that he gets a tacked on plot line at the 11th hour about how he's already dying of what appears to be cancer. On top of which, the highly cliche way that both those characters, Kreese and Silver, died together drained the moment of any sense of oomph. Now, aside from the largely empty conflicts of the final episodes, was the fact that the story of those episodes was just way too predictable and absolutely unrealistic. Basically, Kreese redeems himself by giving Johnny back full control of Cobra Kai as a dojo. Daniel once again has to regain confidence in an arc where he has to decide to let everyone re-enter the Sekai Tekai. Sam throws her own position in the Sekai Tekai to Tori so that Tori can prove herself a legitimate winner in a major tournament for the first time in this series by beating Zara fair and square. Robbie has his rematch against Axel and starts to beat him before Senseis Wolf and Silver convince Axel to cheat by breaking Robbie's leg in a scene that actually serves as a rather solid but more brutal callback to the original Karate Kid's sweep the leg scene, which naturally forces Robbie to forfeit while also conveniently giving Miguel yet more motivation to want to beat Axel, which he does, using every skill he's learned from Johnny and Daniel over the past 5 seasons. Still, Miguel only actually wins because Axel grows a conscience at the last minute and refuses to take the same type of cheap shot on Miguel that he did on Robbie. Johnny is forced through storytelling machinations to fight a tie-breaking match against Sensei Wolf, which Johnny naturally wins after going through a series of internal battles regarding his own sense of self-worth as a sensei and a person. Against that backdrop, Kreese sacrifices himself to blow up Silver on Silver's yacht to ensure that Silver won't ever be able to come after Johnny or his loved ones again. Meanwhile, there are also some wrap-ups regarding the more minor plot points of this season. Daniel gets closure on the silly Mr. Miyagi drama that's been bothering him all season. Johnny and Carmen get married, get a baby, get a house. Daniel goes on being a sensei with full support from Amanda. He and Johnny effectively maintain 2 separate dojos, and they go on working together to train kids in both offense and defense. Dimitri fixes things with Yasmin and decides to go to college together with Eli at Caltech instead of MIT. Robbie conveniently gets a karate modeling contract alongside Tori, so neither of them conveniently has to worry about not going to college. There is, despite the rumors, no guest star appearance by Hilary Swank's Karate Kid character, though I honestly could not have cared less about that and was not even a little disappointed that we didn't get it. And there were certainly things that worked about that general story, like how Tori and Sam reaffirm friendship, how Johnny and Daniel do the same, how Tori is finally a legitimate and self-affirmed winner, how Johnny comes to some kind of peace with both Kreese and with himself as a man who's finally found his own self-worth and some sense of balance. But mostly the story just played out in a highly predictable and highly unbelievable manner. Regarding the fights, there is just no earthly way that Miguel, Tori, and Johnny should have had a prayer of beating Axel, Zara, and Sensei Wolf. The Iron Dragons were established in this story as karate prodigies who've been practicing and treating their bodies as temples practically since they exited the womb. Johnny himself was a karate prodigy during his teenage years, but spent the approximately 40 years in between then and this show on a diet of beer, drugs, and junk food, partying like he was living through the end times. And in the timeline of this show, he's only really been training seriously for about 2 years. Besides which, Sensei Wolf is, or appears to be, at least 20 years younger than him. Miguel in this show has also only been training for about 2 years, plus he spent almost a month of that time in a coma and started his training as a dork with zero experience. Tori had some background in fighting before this series, but she herself still has only been training on a competitive level for about 2 years. And on the one hand, I get it. Cobra Kai, especially seasons 3 through 6, is a highly unbelievable, highly predictable, very simply written show in the first place. There's virtually no complexity or nuance when it comes to the storytelling. Accepting that and suspending almost all disbelief is the price of admission that a viewer must pay to enjoy the story. The just are always rewarded in the end. The wicked are always punished in the end. Underdogs become karate masters by pep talks and one-day training montages. Good kids with about 2 years of martial arts experience beat bad kids with over a decade of experience because they have the power of love on their side. And in that kind of show, there was just no way that the Iron Dragons, standard guest starring purportedly unbeatable bad guys who only even first show up during the second part of this season, were going to beat the main characters whom fans have come to love over the course of the 6-season show. Their role was pretty much just to present as insurmountable odds to underscore the awesomeness of the good guys when the good guys do accomplish the impossible by beating them. I understand. But on the other hand, I did not like the fact that that was the major story forming the backbone of the final Cobra Kai fights that we'll ever see. I wish this show would have gone out on more so of a high in the action department from a practicality standpoint, like the end of part 2 did. Then, even once it was over, the way that Axel, Zara, and Sensei Wolf just left and disappeared was such an anticlimactic letdown that just underscored how empty all of them were as antagonists. The only part of it that had any remote substance was the scene in which Axel finally renounced Wolf as his sensei. Another thing regarding the fights, and I might actually make a separate video about this because my full take on this is a bit too long and detailed a rabbit trail to include in this review. I really did not like the way that the showrunners cucked Robbie yet again in this series by having Axel cripple him, effectively fridging him as motivation for Miguel to finish the fight against Axel, then giving Miguel the win against Axel because Miguel is lucky enough that Axel chooses not to take the cheap shot by crippling him too, which FYI really did lessen even the triumph of Miguel's victory in my eyes. Again, I get that this is Cobra Kai and that the showrunners basically decided from probably the start that Miguel and Johnny always have to be the stars in the end. And I'm not going to say that I like Robbie more than Miguel, but I will say that Robbie in the Cobra Kai universe is and long has been a better written and meatier character than Miguel. Miguel's basic arc was being a bullied nerd with a loving family who learned confidence and later learned that having confidence does not mean being a complete jerk or starting fights. Meanwhile, Robbie truly was this series' most developed underdog character who was wrestling right from the start with the shame of always coming in second place, even though that may not have been how his character was initially conceived by the showrunners. Miguel really had little to nothing riding on his fight with Axel outside of avenging Robbie, given that he'd already gotten into Stanford and already had a basically perfect life outside of karate with his family and Sam. I really do think it would have been far more poetic to maybe have Miguel be the one crippled by Axel in some way, and to maybe have Robbie take that as further motivation to regain his own confidence and win his own final fight with Axel. And then maybe Miguel could have still had his win with getting into Stanford, but perhaps taking a gap year to fully heal from his injuries and travel with Sam on her journey to Okinawa. Winning a world championship title would have been more so a capstone to Robbie's story than that of Miguel, who has said himself in story that the only reason he even really got into karate was to find balance and be alpha enough that people would not be able to bully him. And then Robbie's winning would have also justified, from a storytelling standpoint, the modeling contract that Robbie got alongside Tori at the end of the series, because otherwise that development just feels like a butt pull that was shoehorned in to give Robbie a happy ending to make up for the fact that the showrunners intentionally cucked him one last time for Miguel's sake, because it's just completely unrealistic otherwise that major karate promotion labels would want Robbie to model for them as effectively a third place loser behind Miguel and Axel for a world championship title. Offering Tori that kind of contract after she became a female world champion makes perfect sense, but people just do not line up behind a third place crippled loser to represent them across the globe. Anyway, I've said enough about that. Now, aside from the major final fights and the story, my remaining disappointment was with the rushed and almost tacked on way that the final episode wrapped up the series itself, as well as just how little attention the final few episodes gave its major supporting characters. And that really is an outworking of one of season 6's more overarching problems, which is abysmal pacing. Cobra Kai Season 6 wasted so much time at the front with nowhere plot lines in the first 5 episodes, but spends virtually no time at the back tying off the plot lines that most fans probably wanted to see get more airtime. Like more time between Johnny and Miguel towards the end, or more time with Kenny and Devon after the solid moments that they had in the Sekai Tekai, or another few moments between Sam and Aisha. And again, I understand Cobra Kai has gotten so big that servicing every single named main and supporting character was probably always going to be a tall, if not impossible, order to fill, but still that's the challenge for which the showrunners signed up when they turned the series into such a packed ensemble affair in the first place. When you write new characters into an ensemble story, good storytelling dictates servicing those characters as well, and that's a challenge that Cobra Kai's showrunners certainly failed to meet, at least in the final 5 episodes. So yeah, in the end, Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 3 had its moments, but it was a disappointing, though not necessarily disgraceful, end to a final season that was mid-tier at best, and that I don't even think should have happened in the first place. That's why I'm giving Cobra Kai Season 6 Part 3 a solid 3 cronuts out of 5. But as always, that's just my opinion. Time for you to share yours. Sound off in the comments below to tell me what you think. Do you agree with me? Do you disagree? Or are your feelings more complex? Meanwhile, if you liked this video and made it this far, don't forget to leave a like, click subscribe, ring that bell, and hey, follow me on social media as well. So long.